I'll give you that music soon. We could do that Olam. Yeah, let's. Also 6:43 for those following along online. Havana Shira, Shir Hallelujah. Havana Shira, Shir Hallelujah, 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 Shir Hallelujah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's good to be together. I hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving and that you are still in the gratitude spirit. We can give thanks for Shabbat. We can give thanks for the blessings that we'll be celebrating tonight. I'd like to begin with these words on page 3 or 121 before we kindle the Sabbath lights. O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter this sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love. We light the candles. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehadlik shel Shabbat. We lift up the cup of joy. Kiddush is on page 5 or 123.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho v'yahavu ratzon hinilanu zikaron l'maaseh bereshit ki hu yom tefilah lemikra'ei kodesh zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim kivanu ha'arta ve'otanu kidashta באהבה וברצון, הנחלתנו, ברוך אתה אדוני, מקדש השבת.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
So we are celebrating, among other things, we are celebrating a very special birthday. And I want to, Steve Ruvolo, will you raise your hand? I want everyone to be able to watch you while I say nice things about you. I'm not going to make you stand up here because that could feel uncomfortable, but I want them all to just, focus right on you. So I'll call you up in a minute. I just have a few things to say first. That sounded ominous. I didn't mean it that way. Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed. The world stands upon three things: al haTorah, al ha'avodah, v'al gmilut chasadim. The world stands upon Torah, it stands upon worship, and it stands upon acts of loving kindness. It's one of our most famous and beloved teachings, giving us pillars on which we aim to build our lives and communities. And it is a teaching that I think is embodied by our friend Steve Ruvolo, who is celebrating a milestone birthday this week. Here's why I think so. Al HaTorah. Steve and his lovely and beloved wife Francine have been involved in Jewish life for decades. But it was about 12 years ago that Steve began his Jewish studies in earnest, probably longer than that. From that moment, Steve has been an engaged and enthusiastic learner. Through introduction to Judaism, conversion studies, celebrating his bar mitzvah, Talmud class, Torah study, and any opportunity to learn more about Judaism, Steve is always eager to learn more. He has made Torah study an integral part of his life. Ba'al ha'avodah. Steve is a spiritual person. He takes prayer seriously. You will almost always see him at Shabbat services, and he and I have enjoyed numerous conversations about spiritual and theological questions. Ba'al gmilut chasadim. Steve loves study, and he loves prayer, but I think he loves acts of kindness most of all. When I asked Steve the secret to making it to the age of 80, first he said, converting to Judaism. And then he said, kindness. Kindness is key. Kindness is essential, he said. And kindness is the essence of Torah. And Steve practices what he preaches. He gives generously to others and is always willing to help when someone's in need. Whether it's giving rides to elderly congregants, serving the congregation on committees and on the board, listening with an open heart to someone who has a different perspective from him, or simply offering words of care and compassion to those around him, Steve brings more chesed into the world. The world stands upon three things, and Steve Ruvolo stands upon three things: Torah, Avodah, and Gmilut Chasadim. We are incredibly blessed to have Steve as a member of this community, and so it is my honor to offer him a blessing on behalf of the entire Beth Am family. So I'd like to invite you up, Steve, to receive our blessing. Francine, are you coming too? She says, I guess. No. And we want to extend a special welcome to Paul and Julia and their families who are streaming our service from their homes tonight, and I'm sure are kvelling. All right, come on over. Mishaberach avotenu v'imotenu. May the one who blessed our ancestors before us bless you, Steve, on your 80th birthday. May the years ahead bring health and happiness to you and your family. May you continue to learn and grow as a person and as a Jew. And may you always know the love of your family, friends, and this community. Ad mea ve'esrim. May you live to be 120.
Yay.
We wish you a siman tov and a mazel tov.
1, 2, 3.
Can I give you a hug?
Siman tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, siman tov, siman tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, siman tov,
We continue now with the words of Lecha Dodi as we welcome in that Sabbath bride, page 20 or 138. And as is our custom, we'll sing the first, second, fifth. No, not tonight.
Not tonight.
Oh, man.
We're doing a real oldie, but a good one. For the verses, we're going to sing Shabbat Shalom. It's really easy, so just follow along with us. Here we go.
We turn to page 28 or 146 for the words of Baruch Hu. If you're able, please rise. Twilight chant. The words roll into dark are on your song sheets, which should be in the pocket in front of you. If someone wants to shout out the number of the song, I don't remember it.
Roll into dark.
Roll into dark. You don't have the words.
Into dark, roll into light, night becomes day, day turns to night. Roll into dark, roll into light, night becomes day, day turns to night.
page 34, the words of Shema.
Shema
Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed.
Can be seated. On page 36 or 154, chant words of Ve'ahavta together.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavecha v'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha Ve'hayu ha'dvarim ha'eleh asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha V'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta b'am v'shitecha b'veitecha u'lechtecha b'derech u'shochecha v'kumecha u'kshartam le'ot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot b'einecha Uchtatam al mezuzot beitecha uvisharecha leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'tem kedoshim lelohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher hotzeiti atem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem
Adonai Elohim Emet.
On page 40 or 158, we sing words of Mi Chamocha, of celebrating upon reaching the far shore of a narrow strait. Page 40.
Nora
כי פדה אדוני את יעקב, וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו. ברוך אתה אדוני, גאל ישראל.
Our Torah portion this week begins with a moment of leave-taking. At the urging of his parents, Jacob flees from his vengeful brother Esau and goes to find a wife in the ancestral homeland of his family. But neither fleeing nor going is emphasized in the title word of the portion, Vayetze. He left. Vayetze Yaakov mi Be'ersheva, Vayelech Harana. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. Rashi questions why Vayetze is the opening word of our portion and offers a response. This tells us, Rashi teaches, that the leave-taking of a righteous person from a place makes an impression. As long as the righteous person is in the city, they are its glory and light and majesty. But when they leave, the city's glory, light, and majesty depart. Yitziat Sadiq Osa Rosham. The leave-taking of a righteous person makes an impression. Rashi's comment teaches us that there is a new awareness of the greatness of a person precisely when their physical presence is removed. Rachel Tash has now left her position as executive director and will no longer be a daily presence on our campus. In these moments of blessing, we take note of her service to our congregation, her righteousness, her greatness, and the imprint that she left on this place and on us through her work. So Rachel, will you please join me on the bima? And although I will be opening the ark, I invite you all to remain seated. Rachel, your commitment to our congregation is long-standing. You and Ted joined Beth Am in 1998 with Sam and Ethan. Joanna came along a few years later. And your family's subsequent experiences within the Shabbaton program became your glide path to congregational engagement and led to the formation of lifelong relationships within this community. It was in Shabbaton where you first became a leader at Beth Am. In time, you joined the board, served as the chair of our education steering committee, and you reached the pinnacle of lay leadership when you served as president of Beth Am from 2009 to 2011. A little more than a year later, in 2012, you decided to dedicate your professional self to Jewish leadership and became Beth Am's executive director. You made this leap seeking greater fulfillment and out of a deep sense of love for this congregation. I also imagine that you made this career change in part out of a sense of being called. For why else would someone happily step into what those of us familiar with the work consider to be the most challenging position in synagogue leadership? What a job. Tons of responsibility, long hours, lots of complaints. It is a position that requires endless patience, a broad array of skills, a willingness to sublimate your ego and ensure that, one, the air conditioning works, the books are balanced, and that the lights remain on, and two, that those lights shine brightest on others. Because of your humility, I know that you recoil from any mention of your greatness. But put simply, Rachel, you were a great executive director. There's a story in this week's Torah portion that may help to illustrate your approach to your work. Jacob is making his way towards his family in the east and comes across a well that has a large rock on its top, which required multiple people to remove it so that the flocks can be watered. The shepherds gathered there were waiting for others to arrive because they are unable to move the stone. But Jacob, a person of action, can do it. Alone, Jacob rolls the stone off of the mouth of the well and waters the flocks. In your approach to your work, you are like Jacob, a can-do person who rolls rocks off of wells and ensures that those who need water may drink. Consistently, daily, you made an impression on so many of us with your capacity to overcome obstacles big and small. You are a consummate problem solver, and you do so not with brawn, but with brains, and with grace, creativity, and compassion. Invariably, you were willing to question convention and explore new approaches to organizing our community. You always found ways to get to yes, and in so doing, you deepened a sense of connection to Jewish communal life among numerous congregants and enabled your colleagues to thrive in their work. I've been amazed by your capacity to be calm and composed, especially in difficult situations. Your equanimity is one of your greatest strengths as a person and professional, and it was your equanimity and decisive leadership that moored our congregation during the worst waves of the pandemic. Yitziat tzadeket osa roshem. The leave-taking of a righteous person makes an impression. The manner in which you took leave of your job made an impression on many. But those who reduced your actions and message to merely an expression of disappointment with the outcome of a board's decision missed the point. For your commitment to Beth Am is multidimensional. Your professional conduct was of the highest order. You approached your work with the greatest integrity, and you've long modeled the foundational values of our congregation as articulated by the prophet Micah: to do justice, to love chesed, by which Micah likely meant that we are to treat others in the manner that we all want to be treated. And most of all, as Micah said, to walk modestly with God, a phrase that potentially means to balance interior, private devotion and piety with public or external actions. In other words, that what we do in both spheres of our lives, the public and the private, must be morally upright and consistent. You, Rachel, have long walked this prophetic talk. Rachel, this is a congregation that you love, and there are so many in this community who love and deeply respect you and your family. And so, as you have now taken leave of a professional role within Beth Am, may you discover in time a renewed sense of sanctuary within this place. May this community nurture you as you have nurtured it. In the years ahead, may you find outlets and new foci on which to shine the light of your myriad talents. But most immediately, and in the spirit of this and of every Shabbat, Shivti v'hi nafshi, may you rest and be refreshed, for you are no longer on call. You are no longer the one who has to deal with cars being locked in the parking lot after hours, or getting out of bed to see to an alarm going off on campus in the middle of the night, or figuring out what went wrong with the latest billing cycle, or this is a blessing for you, so you can fill in that blank. You are no longer on call. So may you rest. And may you and Ted enjoy having more time together. May you rest and be refreshed. Shivti v'hi nafshi. And please join with me to say together, Amen. page 345.
May you be blessed as you go on your way. May you be guided in peace. May you be blessed with health and joy. May this be your blessing.
Sat down too soon. The Amidah, our standing prayer, begins on page 46 or 164. And if you are able, I invite you to please rise. Continue to ourselves. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of fellowship and friendship among all the inhabitants of every land. Plant virtue in every soul. May the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Baruch atah Adonai, hamavarech et amo Yisrael b'shalom. Praised are you, Eternal One, who blesses our people with peace. As our community gathers, we find strength in the gathering. We find strength in each other. And as we turn to our prayer for healing on page 253 or 371, we hold on to each other, we lift each other up, and maybe we hold each other up as we offer these words of healing. In particular, this evening, our community is sending prayers of healing of body and spirit to Liz Anderson, Yolanda Azucena, Miles Bennett, Efrat Blatt, Alex Brodsky, Susan Carlson, Karen Drucker, Rudy Andrisi, Marty Gelman, Selena Glader, Stephanie Glickman, Cindy Huppert, Moritz Huppert, Marvin Jones, Mark Lawrence, Bernie Marcus, Edwin Merlos, Harold Muckamal, Sophia Palisban, Rabbi Lori Phillips, Peggy Pizzo, Yaakov Ben Sara, Stephen Abraham Simon, David Baruch Ben Simona, Kate Van Zanten, and Jennifer Wolfeld. There are others that you're sending healing prayers to. I invite you to share their names with our community at this time.
Len Williams. Cheryl Freeman.
Page 253, 371 in the middle of the page.
This Shabbat is our annual Sachs Scholar in Residence program, established by George and Dorothy Sachs. George, along with Dorothy, was a founding member of this congregation. George was also a past president of Beth Am, a veteran of World War II, a beloved husband, father, and grandfather, a successful businessman, and a passionate philanthropist who was a leader in both the Jewish and the arts communities. We remember George on this Shabbat, and we also honor Dorothy and the rest of their family. Sadly, Dorothy has a bit of a cold tonight and is unable to be with us, but I'm hoping you're watching, Dorothy, and I want to thank you for your friendship and for all that you've done for Congregation Beth Am, including the establishment of this annual Scholar in Residence program so that we might have the opportunity to learn from outstanding Jewish teachers. And on this Shabbat, our teacher is Dr. Judith Rosenbaum. Dr. Rosenbaum is CEO of the Jewish Women's Archive, a pioneering digital archive that documents Jewish women's stories, elevates their voices, and inspires them to be agents of change. An educator, historian, and writer, Judith earned a PhD in American Studies from Brown University with a focus on women, gender, and social movements. A former Fulbright Fellow, she teaches and lectures widely on Jewish studies and women's studies, and publishes in both academic and popular journals and anthologies. She serves on the faculty of the Bronfman Fellowship and is a Schusterman Senior Fellow. Judith lives with her family in the Boston area and is a close friend of our family's. It's wonderful to have you here. And the title of Dr. Rosenbaum's talk tonight is Women, History, and Memory, Celebrating and Reconsidering Firsts. It's a pleasure, Judith, to invite you to our bima.
Shabbat Shalom. It is wonderful to be here with all of you, and I'm really honored to be the SAC Scholar in Residence this weekend. I look forward to learning with all of you. So, in the Jewish historical calendar, 2022 has been a year of milestones. The 100th anniversary of the first bat mitzvah in America, and the 50th anniversary of the ordination of the first woman rabbi in America. I'm a historian, so I like to look back to inflection points like these so that we can make sense of how change happens. I also like to complicate the narratives we've received. So I look at anniversaries not just as moments to be celebrated, but also as milestones to be interrogated. One of the important insights that anniversaries can raise is, how do we actually date a particular innovation? In other words, where does change begin? Who gets recognized as the first, and how do we perceive what came before her that may have helped set the stage? Let's take the anniversary of women in the rabbinate, a development that I know this congregation has benefited from. The 50th anniversary dates to the ordination of Rabbi Sally Priesand in June of 1972, which made her the first American woman rabbi and the first woman rabbi ordained by a seminary. We also know, however, that since at least 1890, the question of whether and when women could be rabbis has come up repeatedly in every decade. While this in part, of course, reflects the rising expectations of women's involvement in public life and access to education and professions, we can also assume that the question wasn't born in the 19th century, but preceded it. We know that women served in educational leadership in earlier times, women such as Osnat Barzani, who led a yeshiva in 17th century Kurdistan. Though she may not fit our modern definition of a rabbi since she was not officially ordained, she held a role that was actually more selective and significant, a Rosh Yeshiva who trained other rabbis. So, is she actually the first? What can we learn from the women before 1972, whom we might call proto-rabbis? Osnat Barzani was, above all else, a scholar. She was trained by her father, the head of the yeshiva in Mosul, and when she married, it was under the condition that she would be allowed to continue studying. Ultimately, she ended up teaching the students of the yeshiva in place of her husband, and then officially taking over when her husband died. Despite not being formally ordained, she clearly held authority among men. Her life reminds us to challenge the assumptions that we might hold about the necessary institutional pathways to authority. Ray Frank, who came from San Francisco, was the first woman to preach from a pulpit in the U.S. When she arrived in Spokane, Washington in 1890, just before Rosh Hashanah, and discovered that there were to be no high holiday services because the community was too divided, she took it upon herself to organize and to preach. Hundreds turned out to witness the spectacle of a woman preacher, and they were so impressed by Frank that she was invited to stay and preach again on Yom Kippur. She became an instant sensation, touring for years around the U.S. as a popular speaker on Jewish subjects, often under the headline, "The Girl Rabbi of the Golden West." Interestingly, Frank claimed to have no interest in becoming a rabbi, but her mere presence on the bima sparked significant consideration of the question of women in the rabbinate. And as a speaker, she promoted the spiritual importance of Jewish women and the need for greater opportunities for their religious leadership. From her model, we learn that these proto-rabbis were passionate doers and problem solvers. Paula Ackerman was a Rebbitzin in Meridian, Mississippi. When her husband, the rabbi, died unexpectedly in 1950, the congregation asked her to fill in, and she conducted weddings and funerals, led services, and gave sermons for 3 years until a man could be found to replace her. From Ackerman, we learn these women were resourceful and dependable public servants who, despite their unconventional roles, brought comfort and security to their communities during difficult times. Her story might also prompt us to notice the delicate dance of humility and self-advocacy that these pioneering leaders engaged in, to be seen as capable of holding authority without necessarily commanding it. Then there were the women who studied for the rabbinate but were never ordained. And I'll give you some of their names just because I think it's important to have some familiarity with them, to hear them, to bring them into the room. Martha Newmark and Irma Levy Lindheim in the early 1920s, Helen Leventhal Lyons in the 1930s. Their persistence forced the reform movement to acknowledge that women could, in theory, become rabbis, though they did not get to reap the rewards of their own perseverance. This was almost the case for Regina Jonas, who ultimately became the first woman known to be ordained as a rabbi in 1935 in Berlin. Born in 1902 to an Orthodox family of modest means, Regina felt called to be a rabbi from early childhood, though no one, of course, had ever intimated that such a role was possible for a girl. She began studying for ordination in the early 1920s at the Institute for the Study of Judaism, which was Germany's liberal rabbinic seminary, and she completed her final thesis in 1930 on the subject, "May a Woman Hold Rabbinic Office?" It was the first attempt that we know of to use halakha, Jewish law, to argue for women's ordination. But tragically, her advisor, Edward Baneth, died just before he could ordain her, and his successor refused to fulfill the controversial commitment, and so she graduated with a teaching degree, not a rabbinic one. For the next 5 years, she taught religious studies in both Jewish and public schools until finally, in 1935, Rabbi Max Dieneman agreed to ordain her. Initially, even with her new title, Jonas was unable to obtain a pulpit position, and so she continued to teach and lecture. When the Nazis banned Jewish education in schools, she created a small underground school for girls in her own apartment. But here's where history gets a little weird. The increasing Nazi threat, which ultimately killed her, at first created new opportunities for this woman rabbi. As more and more male rabbis emigrated or were imprisoned, Jonas's leadership was suddenly needed and therefore welcome. It turns out gender conventions are more flexible when the whole world has turned upside down. So Jonas began to serve as a rabbi in Berlin and in the surrounding smaller communities. Even when she and her mother were forced out of their apartment and she was assigned to forced labor at a factory, she continued to lead prayer services in the evening. In 1942, Regina and her mother were deported to Theresienstadt, where she served as a rabbi for 2 years, preaching, teaching, and counseling, until she was deported to Auschwitz, where she was murdered in October of 1944. And then she was seemingly forgotten, despite the fact that people who knew her survived, including prominent leaders like the rabbi and scholar Leo Beck and the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Her story was rediscovered only after the Berlin Wall came down, and her papers, which she had presciently placed in the archive of the German Jewish community before her deportation, were unearthed in East Germany in 1991. Now, I say seemingly forgotten because it's very hard to imagine that those who knew her actually forgot about her. right? Her story was really quite extraordinary. Rather, her story was not one that they chose to tell. Why are some stories passed on and others are left out? Why was Regina Jonas's story so hard to tell? This narrative of a visionary young woman who pursued a very unusual path in a time of crisis didn't quite fit into the horrific story of hatred and extermination, nor did it fit the recognizable outlines of resistance, though I would argue that her persistence and leadership make her a model of a kind of cultural resistance. She's obscured in a shadowy time that doesn't match the narrative of mainstream progress that's usually associated with the emergence of women rabbis. But without her story, those other rabbinic pioneers, women like Sally Priesand and the first women rabbis of the other denominations, Sandy Eisenberg Sasso, Amy Alberg, and Sarah Hurwitz, they didn't have access to the insights of Regina Jonas and the model of how a woman rabbi could work within Jewish law. With knowledge of Jonas, they could have been seen and seen themselves as carrying on a proud legacy, rather than exceptional figures breaking new ground. There is pride, of course, in being a first, but it can also be a distraction or even marginalizing. The designation of first calls out difference, not belonging. Take the term exceptional. The implication is special, unique, but not normative. When someone seeking inclusion is perceived as an exception, even if they succeed in gaining entry for themselves, their presence as a special case is unlikely to lead to broad and lasting change. Jonas expressed this herself, writing in 1939, "For me, it was never about being the first. I wish I had been the 100,000th. In other words, it would have been more meaningful to her to be part of a collective of rabbis, an accepted community of women leaders, than to be marked as a pioneer or as a troublemaker." The first American woman rabbi, Sally Priesand, expressed something similar. Priesand, like Jonas, discovered her calling as a young person. From her early teen years, she knew that she wanted to be a rabbi, again, despite the fact that no one had ever suggested that this was a possibility. Rabbi Priesand told us at the Jewish Women's Archive, "When I decided to study for the rabbinate, I never thought much about being a pioneer, nor was it my intention to champion the rights of women. I just wanted to be a rabbi." But by the time she entered rabbinical school in 1968, the second wave of the women's movement was building momentum, and she was treated as a rabble-rouser, even if that was not her intention or her style. Synagogues refused to hire her for internships, claiming it would be too disruptive to have a woman in the role. Much like Regina Jonas before her, Priesand wrote her rabbinical thesis on the subject of women in Judaism, exploring the changing role of women in Jewish history and what it meant for women to take on public religious leadership. Also like Jonas, Priesand's ordination was championed by an individual male rabbi, in her case Nelson Gluck, who was the president of HUC JIR when she arrived on campus, and he too died before he could ordain her. Thankfully for Priesand, his successor, Alfred Gottschalk, fulfilled the promise of her ordination, and on June 3, 1972, Priesand broke the stained glass ceiling and became a rabbi. Her perseverance and her humble leadership won over her classmates, who stood in her honor when she ascended the bima to be ordained. Firsts are only legible as such if they are followed by something else. And of course, it's what follows the first that actually leads to further change. We see this in the case of bat mitzvah. The first bat mitzvah was Judith Kaplan in March of 1922. But it wasn't her idea. It was the innovation of her father, Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, who went on to be the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism. At the time, just a few months before his daughter's bat mitzvah, he had started his own synagogue, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, now just known as SAJ. And among the innovations he had in mind for his congregation was bat mitzvah. Women's emancipation was in the air. It was just 2 years after the ratification of the 19th Amendment. And Kaplan wanted SAJ to be responsive to the times. As the father of 4 daughters, he also had a particular stake in modernizing Judaism in this way. And he later described Judith as, quote, "the first of 4 reasons for inaugurating bat mitzvah." The other three reasons, of course, being his daughters Hadassah, Naomi, and Selma. Now, as radical as this first bat mitzvah was for its time, it was limited in several ways. Judith didn't read from the Torah scroll, but from a chumash, from a printed book. She didn't ascend the bima, but stood below it. And perhaps most importantly, the bat mitzvah didn't mark the start of ongoing ritual participation for her or any other woman in the congregation. It was the celebration of a moment, not the beginning of a new role for her as a young adult in the community. Those changes took much longer, and those were often initiated by girls themselves. Girls were the first to ask the questions that helped propel bat mitzvah into a revolutionary movement. They asked, like some teen girls at SAJ did in 1945, so this is more than 20 years after Judith Kaplan's bat mitzvah, why were they being taught how to chant the blessings and their Torah portions if they were only going to be allowed to do it once in their lives? Why couldn't they, like the boys, continue to participate in Shabbat services in this way after their bat mitzvah? They asked, like future Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan did in 1973, why her Orthodox synagogue in New York hadn't yet found a way to celebrate a bat mitzvah. Now, they did partially accommodate her request, not with a Shabbat morning service, as she had wanted, but with a Friday night service, and her rabbi, Shlomo Riskin, recalled later that, and this is a quote, "After that, we did bat mitzvahs all the time. She was part of my education. This was a watershed moment." Of course, he's widely credited with inventing the Orthodox bat mitzvah, and I think that credit should go to Justice Kagan. As we know, making room for questions and innovative responses is generative, allowing further questions and further innovation. When bat mitzvah called attention to the ways girls and women were excluded from full participation in Jewish life, it also prompted many to notice who else was left out or didn't have access. How do we include people of different abilities? How do we ensure that families of all kinds are treated with respect? How do we include Jews by choice? How do we mark the coming of age of non-binary kids? The mainstream acceptance of bat mitzvah has solidified the belief that every Jew should have access to a coming of age ceremony, no matter their identity or ability. It's become an essential Jewish life cycle event. And this has sparked new creativity and an expansion of our communities. And thus, the revolution that began with bat mitzvah continues to unfold. Now, there's no magic significance to any number, not 100, not 50. But I believe that these anniversaries are worth noting on the most basic level, because if we forget them, we lose sight of the fact that change actually happens. When I teach teens, almost none of them know that bat mitzvah is only 100 years old, or that women have only been ordained by seminaries for 50 years. Many of them have grown up seeing women lead in their own synagogues, and they assume that it's been a birthright for Jewish girls forever. And there's something beautiful about that. It can be tempting to want to forget the stories that speak of exclusion and inequality. We don't necessarily want to articulate that as part of our heritage. But if we forget that change happened, we lose the opportunity to learn how it happened and to learn from that. And we need to know how change happens, both the successes and the obstacles, so we can continue to make change in the world. If we forget that change happened, we also lose sight of the fact that change is always happening, that our traditions, no matter how traditional they may seem, are constantly evolving. I'm sure you've witnessed that here at Beth Am. Every innovation carries forward the legacy of the pioneers, whether we know their stories or not. And they challenged the ways that they challenged the status quo and took ownership of Judaism. In this week's Torah portion, Jacob dreams of a ladder connecting the spot on which he sleeps to the heavens, a sort of gateway for angels. When he awakes, he exclaims, "Surely Adonai is present in this place, and I did not know it." Like Jacob, we are part of a chain, whether we know it or not. That moment helped Jacob connect to the God of his ancestors and to see himself as part of God's people. So too, I hope that we can learn to see the chain of history and innovation as both sacred and accessible to us. I also want to give us permission to dream ourselves, and here I'll call on a teaching of Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz, the first Orthodox woman ordained a rabbi in the U.S. In 2014, she spoke as part of a historic trip that brought rabbinic pioneers and other Jewish communal leaders to Berlin and Prague in the footsteps of Regina Jonas to learn more about Jonas and to commemorate a plaque in her memory at Theresen. Rabbi Hurwitz grew up in an Orthodox community, and though she was drawn to building and serving Jewish communities, it was inconceivable that she would become a rabbi. But after years of studying and working at an Orthodox congregation as an intern, she was ordained in 2009. Rabbi Hurwitz concluded her remarks at the program on Regina Jonas by noting the importance of dreaming big. She said, "During Birkat HaKohanim, the blessing of the priests, there is a custom to read the refrain, Chalom chalamti ve'eni yodea mahu. I dreamt a dream, but I do not know what it means." She compared her dream of Orthodox women serving as clergy to those ineffable dreams. We must give voice to those dreams, even if they are almost beyond words, even if we don't know yet what they mean. We will make them legible by remembering those dreamers who come before us, like Jacob, like Regina Jonas, and by those who are yet to come. In biblical tradition, remembering is very powerful. When God remembers, something always happens. We see it in this week's Torah portion. When God remembers Rachel, she gives birth to Joseph, who ultimately saves his brothers and enables the generations of Israelites who come from them. Tonight, I invite you to see engagement in history as part of that divine strategy of remembering as an act of agency. A new genealogy, one that includes our own stories and our own dreams, awaits. Shabbat Shalom.
So much. What a terrific sermon. What an honor to be able to learn with you all of Shabbat. It's a wonderful introduction to JWA, Jewish Women's Archive, as well. If you're able, I invite you to rise for words of Aleinu, page 282 or 586.
הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
I invite you to have a seat. Despite all the joy of Shabbat, though, we know there are some who come to our worship, whether you're here in person or you're joining us virtually, who are here because they're thinking of a loved one who's no longer here. And if I read the name of your loved one or friend, I invite you to rise in his or her honor before we all say Kaddish together. Lost to the Bethlehem community this week in the period of Shiva, the seventh day since passing our Sarah Moreau, a dear friend of Fern and Gary Gershwin, and Donald Schilling, the brother of Ron, Marilyn Schilling, and the uncle of Robert and Ann Schilling and Karen Gould Schilling. In this period of Shloshim, 30 days since passing We're thinking of Debbie Reef, Verla Horton, Shoshana Levy, Don Way, Eva Norman, and Lorraine Denenberg. And in this period of Yahrzeit, the anniversary since passing, we remember with love Shimon Azinger, Sheldon Boehm, Pesach Barenberg, Muriel Becker, Vera Yvonne Berlin, Elaine Burnett, Seymour Burson, Bertha Blank, David Brenner, Lawrence Brenner, David Breslauer, Sophie Breslauer, Gordy Brookstone, Karen Osney Brownstein, John Bruggerman Sr., Ronald Check, George Cohn, Joseph A. Davidson, Julius Deutsch, Yevdokaina Dorbasina, Lillian Gran Emden, Louis Engel, William Felt, Carol Flaxman, Piero Foa, Lucille Gaskill, Arlene Gilliand, Osias Goldenberg, Robert Greenwald, Louis Gruber, Jack Hagerup, Samuel Harris, Bernice Hayes, Phyllis Hoffman, Howard Marshall Holtzman, Claire Horn, Melvin Horn, Norm Jacoby, Noreen Jordan, Yaakov Kaplan, Julius Kowarski, David Kelmar, Leanne Kirchner, Joseph Krefitz, Lillian Kronik, Blanche Landau, Anna Levinware, Rabbi Shelley Lewert, Darrell Lewis, Harold Lipton, Mendel Lertzman, Henrietta Loeb, Anita McKenzie, Rebecca Rudin Macauer, Jane Marcus, Arthur Marmer, Leon Mirbach, Joan Morgenstern Sims, Robert Newman, Sidney Richmond, Molly Rubenstein, Vito Ruvalo, Ruth Sable, Irving Schiffman, Sam Schneider, Goldie Schulman, Betty Silberman, Stanley Simon, Bertha Soffer, Jeffrey Sosanow, Leonard Stern, John Sturp, Morton Stock, Israel Unterman, Bella Waxman, Pauline White, Eleanor Virginia Wolf, Rose Wolfeld, and Moshe Zernest. If you're thinking of someone whose name I did not read out loud, I invite you to rise at this time and share their name with our community so we can add them to our prayer. We rise as one. 294. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma divera kirte bi'amlich malchute, b'chayechon uv'yomechon, uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uv'izman kari b'imru amem. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam ulmei almaya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yithale v'yithalal shemed kusha brichu. Le'ela min kol berchata b'shirata. Tush bechata b'nechemata. Damiram bi'alma b'imru amem. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu bi'al kol Yisrael b'imru amem. Osei shalom b'mromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu bi'al kol Yisrael b'imru amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us and to all Israel, to which we say, Amen.
Before we conclude our services, I want to remind you that all throughout this month, our tzedakah box is collecting funds for Sunnyvale Community Services. Sunnyvale Community Services is an independent nonprofit emergency assistance agency in the heart of Silicon Valley. SCS's mission is to prevent homelessness and hunger in our local community. And the goal of SCS is that all residents are safely and stably housed with food on the table and with access to medical care and services. SCS addresses immediate critical needs to help low-income families and seniors who are often one bill away from hunger and homelessness. So I urge you to make a donation, either through our website or Venmo, or by sending a check made payable to Congregation Beth Am. We'll make sure it gets to the right place, mailed to the administrative office. And you'll have another opportunity to learn, actually 2 more opportunities to learn from our scholar in residence, Dr. Rosenbaum. The first is at our ONEG. There'll be some time for some questions and answers with her. And also tomorrow at 4 o'clock, she will be giving a second presentation in this space, in this sanctuary, entitled Intersectionality, What We Must Learn and What Can We Teach. Following that presentation, we will join together for Havdalah. So I hope to see many of you there. And I also hope that you will stay and enjoy this festive Oneg and have some time to celebrate Rachel Tash together. So we conclude with the singing of Od Yavo Shalom on page 353 or 657.
Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu le'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam Aleinu le'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam. Salam Aleinu le'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Salam Aleinu le'al kol ha'olam. Salam Shalom. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. Ve'al kulam.
Mahalo.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.